Hi, my name is Corey Smith, and this is my Mammalogy Exam 1 oral presentation. So the first thing we're going to take a look at for this presentation is three transformations that happen from non-mammalian to mammalian. And the three I'm going to focus on are hair, hind limb movement, and then some of the changes in teeth and jaw. So let's start off with the hair. So, what advantage does this provide to mammals? The obvious first is insulation from cold, or some mammals even have it where they have multiple layers of hair, and this can help them, like something like an otter, when they're getting in and out of the water in cold environments, it actually can help keep their skin dry. And then some mammals will use their hair and color to either blend in or camo into an area and to send warning signs. Like, for example, we can think of a skunk. The coloration of a skunk kind of gives off a warning sign, don't mess with me, or whatever. And then off of that, we will actually see some species use mimicry in color. So they'll have color similar to the skunk, even though they don't have the same thread that a skunk has. And then the next one we'll look at is hind limb movement. And the way I would like to think of this, and the example I can use, is an alligator versus a lion. If you think of an alligator, while it's kind of quick and agile in short motions, it's very sprawled out, and its top end speed is nothing like a lion's or a big cat's, where they have full movement of their hind limbs, and it's very streamlined compared to the sprawled out motion. And so, this can be used in chasing prey or avoiding predators, either one. So if you can, again, think of a lion running down its prey, you can picture the hind limbs and how they move with the forelimbs. And then, as we watched this TED Talk video earlier in the semester on sloths, they can also be used for climbing and hanging and keeping them stable in trees or something along those lines. And then some of the changes in teeth. In the earliest mammals, we start to see molars and premolars, and this was unique at the time to mammals. And this kind of development allowed for the first herbivores. And interestingly enough, it allowed for chewing on either side of the mouth. So if you can think, as a human, if we get a toothache or some type of infection on one side of our mouth and it is irritable, we can chew on the other side of our mouth. That's just a kind of a way to think of that. And that came from early mammalian development. And then an important note is teeth vary a lot among mammals, and you can tell a lot about the diet of a mammal based off their teeth. For example, carnivores had these really sharp cheek teeth, almost canine-like teeth, and they're to cut and tear and hold like prey into place and to deliver a finishing blow to the prey. Where a herbivore kind of has these cusp-like teeth that can be used for chewing tough plant matter. In the next portion of this presentation, we'll take a look at still extant subclasses of mammals. We'll look at monoterms, marsupials, and placentals. So monoterms, they first were found in the Jurassic period. This makes them the oldest mammals. And some of the differences from the other two subclasses is, one, they are the oldest lineage. They are oviparous, which means they lay eggs, um, which is more reptilian-like or bird-like compared to what you would think as mammal-like. Um, and now, different than most mammals, like a few slides ago, I was talking about the hind leg movement. They really don't have it. They have more of that sprawled out, like the alligator, rather than that streamlined movement of like a line. So it's a little bit, not, that streamlined movement is not um, conditional to all mammals. These still kind of have that sprawled out movement rather than that streamlined movement with their hind limbs. And they do have a temporary pouch for these eggs. Similarity to other mammal other mammal subclasses is they do have mammary glands, but an important note is they do not have a nipple. They still give their young and nourish their young with milk, but it's just not through a nipple. It's more like a sweat-like process. And like most mammals, they do have long maternal care. Some examples of monoterms can be the duck-billed platypus, which is pictured in the top left corner of that picture, and then the short-beak incid. So next we'll move on to marsupials. They diverged in the Cretaceous period. Some of the difference between marsupials and the other two classes or subclasses are that a lot of them have specialized feet. This is very interesting. They have specialized feet mostly for movement. So if you can picture a kangaroo, they have very unique feet, and it's very unique to them. And then they also, marsupials do have a permanent pouch. Unlike a temporary pouch of the monoterms, they do have a permanent pouch. And differently than the other mammals, they have a very short gestation period, but a long lactation period. And their offspring come out very embryotic-like and underdeveloped, and they rely on their mother for a very, very long time. Similarity to the other classes is, again, they were derived in the Cretaceous, just like the placentals. They do have long maternal care, and they do have mammary glands, and they do have nipples. And two examples we can look at, one is pictured here is the common wombat, and then another one would be the Virginia possum, which most of us are familiar with. Then we'll take a look at the placentals. They also derived in the Cretaceous period. Some of the difference is in with this subclass is that they do have a very long gestation period. You can think of a human has a 9-month period, or like an elephant has a multi-year period. It's much longer than the other two classes. But when an offspring does is born, it is anatomically complete. It's not embryonic like. It it's pretty well ready to go. Out of the womb. And then this is believed to be the first mammalian predators that diverged. And they were larger at the time when they diverged, they were larger than the other two subclasses of mammals. And then some similarities again. They developed in the Cretaceous period, like the marsupials. Again, the long maternal care and mammary glands, and obviously they do also have nipples. An example here can be the orca or killer whale, which is pictured here, or one that most people are familiar with would be like an elk. Next, we'll take a look at a sensory organ that isn't unique to mammals, but it's different in mammals. And one is hearing. So mammals are the only vertebrates with a penta, which a penta is like an outer ear. Like if you can picture a rabbit or even a cartoon or animated rabbit, it's very um, blown out of proportion in cartoons where a rabbit will have these massive ears. Well, that is unique to mammals. And not all mammals have that, but that is unique to mammals. And then, you can feel your own ear as a human, and that, again, unique to mammals. Then we move on to the middle ear. And these bones in the middle ear actually started much larger and evolved into smaller bones known as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. And really, the job here for them is to um, recreate or produce the sound into the inner ear. Then in the inner ear, there is this spiral-like structure and it's in a wet environment, and it has upwards of 30,000 hairs in it, and the hairs vibrate and through the nervous system, and they transmit this sound to the brain, interpret this sound to the brain. So we're going to look at a few different development strategies now. We're going to look at delayed development, delayed fertilization, and delayed implantation. So delayed fertilization is where the female, after copulation, the female will store the sperm. And this is a popular method in dormant species with a short active season. So after copulation, the egg is not fertilized. The sperm is just stored. And then um, after the dormant season, and when we're entering into the active season, gestation will happen, and the egg will be fertilized. And an example of this is the little brown bat. And a little fact about the little brown bat is, unfortunately, they are endangered. Uh, Delayed implantation is the egg is actually fertilized, but now the blastocyst, the fertilized egg, is kind of suspended in the uterus. It's not implanted, but it is fertilized. So it's like it's one step more than the delayed fertilization before it kind of pauses. And this is popular in postpartum copulation species, and this can help them time the ideal birth during the birth season. One example of this is a striped skunk typically will use delayed implantation. And then we'll take a look at delayed development. So again, this is one step further than the delayed implantation, because here the blastocyst does implant into the uterine wall, and then it just kind of sits there. Just that's where it pauses, and then this allows species to like mate in summer and fall, and then again get that ideal birth time during the spring or whenever resources are at their highest peak. And these are used a lot in some bat species who like to do nurseries together. Like they have colony nurseries, and it will help them. An example of a species that does this is a roe deer. So next we'll look at a species that undergoes deep hibernation. And the species I want to focus on is the groundhog. Groundhogs range over most of North America, upward reaches of Canada and Alaska, and then as far south as states like northern Alabama. And you can imagine that hibernation is important so they can conserve energy while resources are low. They hibernate in burrows underground, and they hibernate typically from the first frost, which is going to be that late October to early November, depending on the part you are, or the part of the country, part of North America you are in. And then it will last till early spring when the air temperatures first start to rise. And again, it varies on what part of North America you are in, but it's typically going to be late February to early March. And this is a little bit earlier than a lot of species that uh, go through deep hibernation. So why is it considered deep hibernation for the groundhog? Well, their body temperature drops significantly. It drops from 99 degrees, 98 degrees, all the way down to 59 degrees and 58 degrees. It drops a full 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the heart rate just drops tremendously. It drops from about 100 beats per minute to only 4 beats per minute, which is pretty wild to drop to only 4% of what it normally is. And it can last. Deep hibernation for the groundhog can last for over 3 months. I mean, and it's not like some other species that will kind of go in and out of hibernation depending on the current conditions. It will pretty well stay in that hibernating state. And again, the evolutionary advantages for this is it allows them to conserve energy when resources are low. And even in the southern states like Alabama, the northern reaches of Alabama, you can picture that even though it might not have as harsh winters as the northern parts of North America, it still has less resources than what it would normally have during the winter months, and there's a lot less greenery. And then when you are in the northern reaches of North America, all of the greenery is pretty well covered and dead. And so deep hibernation allows the groundhog to conserve energy and survive off these very, very little resources. So lastly, we're going to take a look at wildlife diseases. We're going to take a look at hemorrhagic disease and chronic wasting disease. So hemorrhagic disease, the host are ruminant species, so deer, cattle, things like that. And it's caused by some different viruses. One is the blue tongue virus. The vector, or the way it spreads, it can spread through midges. And while a midge is not a strong flyer, midges are very small and they can move great distances from wind currents. So if you can imagine a midge is on an infected deer and becomes infected, and it's in one population, then a strong wind current can move this midge to other deers or even another population of deer. So multiple populations can be infected, as well as the entire single population be infected. Some of the symptoms of hemorrhagic disease is it attacks blood vessels and can lead to leaky vessels. It can lead to, like internal bleeding. Um, and some of the visible signs of it are deer can become weak and less aware of their surroundings. Or in some cases, they can be very symptomatic. We think of COVID-19 as an example of humans. While some humans are infected, they don't show symptoms of the disease, and you can have the same thing here with hemorrhagic disease on white-tailed deer. The hemorrhagic disease is pretty seasonal. It's going to be from late summer to early fall, so a fairly short window actually. And then the impacts of it, long-term population impacts are still being learned. They are unknown for the most part. One concern is it can affect livestock. Now, one area it doesn't really affect is hunting because, it's typically falls outside of the window of hunting season. It's normally wrapped up before hunting season comes around. Now, some management practices on it. We're still learning a lot about it. There's really not management practices known for it yet, other than it just needs to be strictly monitored. Um, so in most cases, we want to know what's going on and we want to be aware of it, but there's not much action we're actually taking yet. And it's something we're still learning. Chronic wasting disease. So the host are cervids, so deer, elk, moose, species like that. And the cause is prions, which is a non-living abnormal protein. And the vector, which is one we're still learning a lot about, we're not 100% sure on all of them just yet. It can be foodborne, it can be infectious, it can even be spontaneous. But again, that's one we're still learning a lot about. Some of the symptoms of chronic wasting disease is it is 100% fatal. If a white-tailed deer does contract this disease, it's going to die. Either if it's not killed by something else first, it will die from chronic wasting disease. High-risk areas can include the head and skull area and the backbone. And a concerning thing about this is it can take several years to show symptoms. So again, you can think of this like compared to a human example with COVID-19. You can have a human who is infected with COVID-19 and not showing symptoms and is unaware he or she is infected, and then they go to an event and spread it. So, you know, here we can have deers that aren't showing symptoms yet, even though they eventually will, but they're not showing it yet, and they can spread it great. And this can be a concern with hunters as well. They can harvest a deer and move a deer that's not showing symptoms of chronic wasting disease, but it is infected in some cases. So chronic wasting disease is non-seasonal. It is pretty well year-round. Um, Impacts, it doesn't seem to infect livestock or humans, but the risk still could be there. So we are still um, looking into this and learning more about this. And it's still a risky situation, but at this time, it doesn't seem to have any effect on livestock or humans. And it can really take a toll on the population of whitetail. It can really burn a population to the ground. And this is obviously a concern, great cause of concern to hunters. As far as management goes, there is still no known cure of chronic wasting disease, but the best management for chronic wasting disease is to prevent it from spreading. This requires hunters to obligate with laws and regulations of their areas. If hunters do this and do the right thing and are respectful of the laws and regulations, then it will prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease to a very great extent. If they are not moving deer that could possibly be infected over state lines or harvested deer over state lines or over county lines, whatever the laws and regulations may be for their area, this will go a great deal in preventing the spread of chronic wasting disease. So lastly, we'll take a look at hemorrhagic disease versus chronic wasting disease. Hemorrhagic disease needs to be monitored and well monitored, but chronic wasting disease actually does need to be managed, and it leans heavily on the hunters obligating to the laws and regulations of their area. Chronic wasting disease is 100% fatal, and it's not limited to a season like hemorrhagic disease. So that deer or whitetails can survive hemorrhagic disease, and it isn't limited. Hemorrhagic disease is limited to a season. Chronic wasting disease, while it is spreading and spreading at an alarming rate, right now it is mostly in the Midwest. And then finally, one of the most obvious differences between hemorrhagic disease and chronic wasting disease is that hemorrhagic disease affects the blood vessels, while chronic wasting disease affects the nervous system. And this is my work cited, and I thank you for listening to my oral presentation. Thank you.